"Can I clean your barn for a plate of food?" But when the struggling rancher saw her, he froze. Texas Panhandle, winter of 1879. The wind howled across the open prairie like a lost child screaming into a canyon. Snow dusted the dry grass in thin, bitter sheets, and the sun, low and sickly, barely warmed the skin. The land was dying slowly, starved of rain, starved of life, and so were its people. Bo Ramsey had just stepped out of the barn, the door creaking on its rusted hinges, when he saw her. She stood near the front gate, or rather knelt there, bare knees in the red dirt, arms wrapped tight around a bundled child. Her coat was no more than a tattered shawl, her dress stained with ash and dried milk. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but it did not hide the desperation in her eyes. "Please," her voice cracked, "I can clean your barn. Anything, sir, just a plate of food." For her. Bo did not speak. His hand, his only hand, tightened on the barn door. He had seen the starving before. He had fed wolves in men's clothing who wore faces like hers. But some invisible thread pulled at the edge of his soul. The child's head lolled against her mother's shoulder. A small hand clutched the fabric at the woman's collar. That fabric. Bo squinted. A scarf, tattered, faded, but the thread, the pattern, his chest locked. Agave blossoms? A yellow bloom with red edges, hand-stitched in the corners. "Where did you get that scarf?" he asked quietly, his voice deep and uneven. The woman's lips trembled. "It belonged to my husband." "What was his name?" Luis Ortega." The wind stopped. Just for a breath. Or maybe time had simply refused to move forward. Bo took a step back, the barn's shadow swallowing him whole. His left hand shook as he reached for the splintered rail. His right sleeve hung empty at his side, the place where war had taken what he would never get back. Luis Ortega. The boy with eyes like fire and a laugh that made foxes tilt their heads. They had fought together at Wilderness. Luis had pulled him from the mud when Bo's shoulder was torn by grape shot. He had tied this very scarf around Bo's wound, soaked in blood and sweat, and whispered, "You're not dying here, Migo. Not next to me." Luis, who had been captured after the war and falsely branded a deserter. Luis, who had been hung before Bo could testify. And now here she was, his widow, with a daughter who looked just like him. Bo's jaw clenched. He had never paid that debt. He turned away. "Come inside," he said. The woman did not move. "Sir, I am not asking for pity, just a job. I said come inside," Bo growled sharper now, "before she freezes." Still holding her child, she stood on weak legs. He did not look at her again. He only walked toward the house, opened the door, and left it ajar. The inside smelled of smoke and pine and something older, loneliness layered in wood. He poured warm water into a chipped basin and set it near the stove. He lit a small fire, moving with the precision of a man who did everything with one hand, who had stopped cursing God about it long ago. The woman stepped inside. Her shoes fell apart at the heel. Her daughter whimpered softly. Bo set out a tin plate and broke what was left of a corn biscuit in half. He said nothing. She whispered, "Thank you." He did not answer, only stared at that scarf, and thought of Luis, smiling through the noose. The next morning came bitter and slow. Ice hung from the rafters like silver claws. The stove had long gone cold. Mira had curled herself around Lucia through the night, trying to lend warmth she barely had. Bo moved silently through the house. He brought a chipped mug of hot water and left it on the floor beside her without a word. Mira mumbled a thank you, but Bo had already turned away, pulling on his coat. He walked to the barn. Mira watched from the window as he moved through the snow. There was a quiet rhythm to him, measured, patient, but something strange caught her eye. Bo chopped firewood with his left hand only. He braced the log with his boot, raised the axe with a slow, awkward swing, and let it fall, again and again. She blinked. That was not clumsiness, that was adaptation. Later, when she offered to help clean the stalls, Bo handed her a pitchfork and pointed, then walked away. He said very little, only when necessary. When he did speak, it was with that low, dry voice, like old saddle leather and sand. By the third day, Mira had swept the barn, mended 2 blankets, and warmed cornmeal for Lucia on the stove. The girl slept often. Mira suspected fever, but had nothing to treat it with. Still, Bo said nothing when she used the last of his lard and salt. S simply nodded. She began to notice how he did things, opening the gate with his elbow, pulling the kettle off the stove with a hand-wrapped hook, writing figures on a ledger with slow, careful scrawl, always with his left. But it was not until that afternoon, when the snow returned, that she understood. Bo was crouched beside the hearth outside, trying to light kindling in the wind. His coat hung heavy with wet, his brow low. The flint struck, but sparks vanished into the gusts. He tried again, dropped the tinder, fumbled. Mira stepped forward, hesitant. "May I help?" Bo flinched. "I can do it," he said, firmly. She waited. "You have only one hand," she said gently. He stilled. "People see me swing an axe," he replied. "They see me carry a pail. They see what is still there. They do not see what is not." Mira stepped closer, her voice softened. "But I see it." His eyes met hers, hard, unreadable at first. Then, slowly, something cracked beneath the surface. Not anger, not shame. Recognition. "You see it?" he repeated. She nodded. "Yes. And I do not think less of you for it." Bo exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "I lost it at Wilderness," he said finally. "Minneball took the whole damn shoulder with it, bled like a butchered steer." She said nothing, just knelt beside him, took the flint and struck it clean in one try. The fire came to life. Bo leaned back on one knee, watching the flames lick the logs. Then, after a long silence, he said, "You knew Louise?" He swallowed. "Yes. He talked about you." She looked up sharply. "He did?" Bo nodded. "Said he married a woman with the eyes of a hawk and the voice of a chapel bell. Said he would walk through hell barefoot if it meant seeing her smile again." Mira's lips trembled. Her hand instinctively touched the scarf at her neck. "It's scarf," Bo murmured. "He wrapped it around my arm the night he pulled me from the muck. Said it would stop the bleeding and bless the wound." Mira closed her eyes. "He never came back." Butler looked away. "No, he did not." They sat in silence a while, snow falling like dust around them. "Ah," Lucia cried from inside the house. Mira moved to rise. Bo said quietly, "Let me." He stood, walked into the cabin and returned with the child in his arms, bundled in a quilt. She stirred against his chest, but did not cry again. He placed her in Mira's lap, then turned toward the woodpile once more. "You are safe here," he said, without turning. "You and the girl." Mira's hands trembled around Lucia's body. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. The wind quieted that night, the kind of stillness that came only after a heavy snow, when even the coyotes had nothing left to say. The fire in the hearth crackled low. Mira sat at the edge of the cot, Lucia nestled in her lap, her tiny chest rising with shallow breaths. Bo sat across the room, sharpening a dull blade with slow, deliberate strokes. The metal whispered against the stone. Mira had not spoken much since morning. But now, as the firelight flickered across her face, she finally said, "He was not a traitor." Bo looked up. "My husband. Luis. They said he was helping border runners, moving goods without tax. Said he was a smuggler, but it was not true." She ran her fingers gently through Lucio's hair. "He gave food to families with no land, helped them cross to reunite with kin on the other side. He never took $1 for it, only did what was right." Bo said nothing. The blade in his hand stilled. "They caught him outside El Paso," she continued, her voice flat but fraying. "He was carrying a baby across the river. The mother had drowned. He tried to explain. They did not care. They hung him 2 days later." Bo stood slowly, walked to the cabinet in the far corner. From behind a tin of flour, he pulled out a small, locked box. "I was with him once," he said, voice rough. "We fought side by side, at Wilderness. He saved my life. More than once." Mira looked up, startled. Bo unlocked the box and removed a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, creased, edges curled from time. "He wrote this to me. From jail." Bo opened the letter. His eyes scanned the ink, faded but still legible. "Bo, hermano, if they let this reach you, I got one request. Her name's Mira, my wife, my soul. If she ever comes looking, and if you're still breathing, you take care of her like she's blood. She never believed in luck. Said we made our own. Maybe this is me trying to make some from inside a cage." Bo handed the letter to Mira. She took it with shaking hands, eyes locked on Louis's handwriting. "He never told me he wrote to anyone," she whispered. Paul Manafort, Deborah, and Ajita Commune, both dead, kept Manafort's picture. "I do not think he knew if it would make it out," Bo said. "But it did." She stared at the paper as if it might vanish in her hands. Her lips moved silently, reading the words over and over. Bo turned back to the hearth. "That scarf you wear," he said. "He wore it the day he dragged me out of the trench. He tore it to bandage my arm." Mira's fingers instinctively touched the fabric around her neck. "I found it among his things after. They returned what was left." The silence was deep but not empty. Something had shifted in the space between them, like a door had creaked open somewhere in the soul. Bo spoke again, softer now. "I do not know why you came here, but maybe it was not chance." She met his eyes. "No, I do not think so either." Later that night, while Mira and Lucia slept, Bo went out into the cold with a hammer, nails, and 2 cedar boards. The roof above the porch had been leaking for years. He never cared. Let it drip, let it rot. But now, under the moonlight, he worked slowly, one-handed, balancing each board with his knee. He moved without sound, like a ghost fixing the bones of a house that no longer belonged to just him. He returned inside before dawn and set a patched coat at the foot of the bed where Mira lay. He had sewn it the night before, needle gripped between fingers grown clumsy and strong, every stitch rough but whole. He did not leave a note. Only laid the coat down gently, turned, and went back to the barn. Morning came slow, dragging its pale light across the plains like an old memory reluctant to return. Mira sat by the hearth, holding Lucia close, her little feet tucked into Mira's shawl. She had found it that morning, the coat. Not just any coat. The child's coat Bo had laid at the foot of their bedding. She had run her fingers over the stitching. Crooked, uneven, but strong, firm, the kind of sewing done not by habit but by heart. On the inside lining, near the armpit, the initials L.O. were still faintly visible. It had once belonged to Luis. Bo had taken it, patched it, reshaped it, and given it back, to the only piece of Louis he had left in this world. Mira said nothing, but that silence was loud inside her chest. Later that evening, after supper, beans and leftover cornbread, Bo sat outside on the porch with Lucia. The sky above stretched purple and wide. Coyotes howled far off. The world felt distant, almost forgiving. He held a piece of soft penwood and a shard of charcoal. "You know how to write your name?" he asked the girl. Lucia looked up at him, big-eyed and uncertain. He smiled. "Let's try your mama's first, M-I-R-A." He carved each letter slowly, saying them aloud. She repeated them, clumsily, sweetly. Then she took the charcoal and tried it herself. Crooked M, backwards, R, but it was hers. Mira watched from inside the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, her heart doing things she had not allowed in years. The coal smudged Lucia's fingers, and Bo wiped them gently with his handkerchief. Lackhand, always. Always that remaining hand. He saw Mira standing there. He did not wave, just nodded, soft and knowing. That night, after Lucia had fallen asleep, Mira stayed back while Bo prepared to return to the barn where he slept. She spoke first. "You loved someone." Bo paused, then sat down, slow. Yes. Pretty she was. A nurse, he said. Collared. Name was Ruth. Met her near the end of the war. She patched up men nobody else would touch. Said everyone deserved one more day. Mira leaned forward, elbows on her knees. What happened? Bo looked into the fire. War ended, but peace did not come. Some towns did not want her kind walking their streets. She got caught in a riot, protecting a child. They beat her so bad the doctor said her ribs were like broken eggshells. Mira closed her eyes. She died that night, he added quietly. In my arms. I was too late. There was no more wind, only the crackle of pine and the hush of pain too old for words. Mira reached across the small table, not boldly, not with pity, but with presence. She took his left hand in hers, rough, calloused, hardened by winters and grief. She said nothing. That was enough. Bo's shoulders relaxed. He looked at her, not like a man seeking approval, but like someone who had not been seen in years, truly seen. I made Ruth a promise, he said, that I would not bury myself with her, that I would keep someone warm if they ever came to the door. Mira's eyes brimmed. Not tears, not quite, but the weight behind her gaze was heavier than any sob. You kept it, she whispered. Bo let go of her hand gently. Stood. He walked to the back room and returned with a wool blanket, thin, worn, but clean. He walked to the cot where Lucia slept and tucked the girl in with care. Then, with a tenderness more sacred than touch, he folded the extra blanket and placed it at the foot of Mira's mattress. His voice barely carried. It gets colder at night. Then, without another word, he picked up his coat and stepped outside. The barn door creaked open, then closed. And in that dark, Mira sat beside the fire, holding her daughter, wrapped in a stranger's promise, warm for the first time, in more ways than one. The town of Mason Hollow was a half-day's ride from the ranch, not much more than a dry goods store, a saloon that never closed, and a sheriff who took his coffee with whiskey and his laws with salt. Mira had walked there that morning, bundled in Louis's old scarf, with Lucia strapped to her back and a few coins tucked into her sock. Bo had offered his horse. She had refused. She could walk. She needed to feel her feet hit the earth, to remind herself that she still belonged to it. The air was heavy with dust and frost, the kind that bit through fabric and buried into bone. She stepped into the general store, asked for cornmeal and lard, and waited as the clerk measured scoops into a brown sack. That was when the door creaked open behind her. Boots. Sharp and slow. He turned before the bell even finished ringing. Eldon Cray. He was older than she remembered, but only in years. His eyes were still cruel, his smile still crooked in a way that made people feel smaller. He wore a silver buckle the size of a plate and a pistol that never collected dust. Well, hellfire, he said, tilting his head. Look what the prairie dragged back. Mira stood her ground. Didn't think you made it out, he said, sauntering closer. Your man? Sluice, was it? Yeah, he had that same scarf, I remember now. Yellow thread, agave blossoms. Her hand instinctively gripped the fabric at her throat. You ordered his death, she said. He chuckled. I signed the paper, but the law was clear. You remember that, sugar? Clear as sunrise. Mira picked up the sack and walked out without another word. He did not follow, but he did not need to. That night, the smell of smoke woke Bo before the sound did. His body had learned to read danger before his mind caught up. He burst through the barn door and saw the flames licking the corner of the porch. Get up, he shouted. Get the girl. Mira was already cradling Lucia, her eyes wide and terrified. Out the back, he barked. Go. They scrambled through the kitchen door and into the night. The sky was a sheet of stars above, but all Mira could see was fire swallowing wood and the silhouette of Bo dragging a bucket with his left hand, trying to put out what he could. The fire was too fast. He cursed under his breath, then turned to Mira. Follow me. He led them to the old livestock barn, abandoned and half-collapsed but dry. He pushed aside rotting hay and debris, revealing a small trap-door in the ground. "I used to hide whiskey down here during the embargo," he said. "No one but me knows it's here." They climbed down into the shallow cellar. The air was cold and musty, but safe. Bo did not sit. He crouched at the top, keeping watch through a crack in the barn wall. "They'll come back," Mira said quietly. "He knows who I am." "I know," Bo replied. "Then I should go." He turned his head slowly. The firelight from the house reflected in his eyes, turning them into twin embers. "You think running will stop them? Cray is not after you. He's after silence. And you carry the truth." Mira shook her head. "I cannot let you burn for me." "You will not," he said, then added lower, firmer, "Not without me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Why?" Bo looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair wild from wind and fear, her arms trembling as she held her daughter, her face set like carved stone. "Because you once knelt at my gate for a plate of food," he said, "and I have knelt to no one since the war ended. But tonight—" He stepped toward her, firelight flickering behind him like Judgment Day. "Tonight I kneel for the love you brought into this house, the love he left behind, and the kind you gave back without asking." He dropped slowly to one knee, the same leg Luis had braced when he pulled him from a trench. "I may only have one hand," he said, "but I will build you a fortress with it." Mira could not speak, but Lucia reached for Bo, small hands outstretched. He took her gently, cradling her against his chest. Then he looked back at the house. It was burning, but something in him had just begun to ignite. The courthouse in Mason Hollow was more of a barn than a building of justice, for walls of warped pine, windows too dusty to see through, and a flag that sagged more than it flew. But on that morning it held the weight of a reckoning. Bo rode silently beside Mira, the wagon creaking beneath them as Lucia dozed against her shoulder. The road was dry, flanked by brittle grass and cow skulls half sunk in dust. The sky was too wide, the silence too loud. "You do not have to do this," Bo said, not for the first time. "I do," Mira replied. "For him, for others like him." She wore the scarf again, agave blossoms and faded thread. Her hair was tied back, her face bare, but there was a fire beneath her eyes that had not been there before. Inside the courthouse, the benches were full. Men in sweat-stained hats, women with lips pursed like blades. They knew who she was, knew who he was, and knew exactly what was at stake. Eldon Cray stood tall, smug, leaning on his cane like a man stepping off a stagecoach instead of being dragged into court. His lawyer, thin, sharp-nosed, smelling of ink and whiskey, rose to speak first. "There is no proof," the man barked. "No evidence. Just the words of a grieving woman and a broken soldier. This court cannot, must not, base judgment on rumor and regret." Bo sat beside Mira at the plaintiff's table, his shoulders straight, his one hand resting over hers. The judge called Mira to the stand. She stood slowly, walked toward the front, and placed a trembling hand on the Bible. "State your name," the judge said. "Mira Ortega." "Speak your truth." She did. At first her voice wavered, like an old violin played after years in silence. She spoke of Luis, of their quiet life, his work, his love for justice. Then she spoke of Eldon, the threats, the trial with no defense, the hanging at dawn while the papers lied. Cray's lawyer objected. "Hearsay." "Overruled," the judge muttered. Mira kept going, but as she described Luis's final words, her knees buckled. The room blurred. The air thinned. Her hands shook. Then Bo was there. He rose from the bench and crossed the room in 2 long steps. His boots echoed against the wooden floor. He took Mira's hand, not with urgency but with reverence, and brought it to his chest. He pressed it over his heart. "Hold your hand here," he whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. "The fear, it's in here. Let me keep it for you." She stared at him. The world slowed. and something inside her steadied. She turned back to the judge. Her voice returned, clearer now, harder. "I watched him sign the order," she said, pointing at Eldon Cray. "I saw his face when he laughed. He told Luis, 'You should have stayed on your side of the river, boy.' And then he walked away, while the rope pulled my husband off the earth." Gasps moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Cray's face paled. His lawyer stood, sputtering. "Objection." "Sit down," the judge snapped. Mira reached into her shawl and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter Luis had written Bo. She handed it to the bailiff. "This," she said, "is a letter my husband wrote from prison. He named Eldon Cray as the man who signed his death." The judge read silently, lips tightening. "This letter matches the handwriting of prior military correspondence from Mr. Ortega," the judge finally said. "I will allow it." The room shifted. Mira sat down. Bo placed his hand, his one steady hand, on her shoulder. Neither of them smiled. Not yet. But a storm had turned. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, Eldon Cray stared at the floor like a man who had just noticed the gallows were built with his name already carved. The verdict came down like thunder across a plain. Guilty. Guilty, guilty. 3 counts of conspiracy, 2 of corruption, 1 of murder by abuse of authority. The judge's voice never rose. It did not need to. Truth had finally spoken louder. Eldon Cray was sentenced to death by hanging, to be carried out within the week. The news swept through Mason Hollow like wildfire. Some wept. Some raged. Some quietly nodded, knowing the scales had tilted, if only for a moment, in favor of the just. Bo stood outside the jailhouse, arms crossed, eyes on the wind. Mira stood beside him, holding Lucia's hand. Neither said much. The weight of what had passed still hung over them like a second sky. Then the sheriff approached. "He's asking for her," the man said. "Wants to speak before the rope." Bo's jaw tightened. "No." Burned to him. "Yes." He looked at her. "You do not owe him anything." "I know," she said. "That is why I can go." Bo didn't answer. He just stared at the door as Mira stepped through it. The cell was dark and damp. Eldon Cray sat on the cot like a man expecting a train that would not stop. His hair was thinner now. His hands trembled slightly, but his smile was the same, half-rotted and cruel. "Well," he said, "you clean up well for a widow." Mira said nothing. He leaned forward. "You think justice came today? You think that rope's gonna balance the scales? Let me tell you something, girl." His voice dropped into a whisper. "You should have died with him." Mira didn't flinch. "You were supposed to burn, like the rest of his kind, but you crawled out, like a snake." Still, she didn't speak. Cray leaned back, grinning. "I watched him twitch, you know that? Watched his boots scrape the dirt, heard the rope creak. That sound, God, it was sweet." Mira blinked. Once. Then turned her back and walked out. Outside, Bo stood like a shadow made of iron. His gaze met hers. She nodded once. No tears, no shivers. Just the look of a woman who had stared down the abyss and found it smaller than her will to live. As she stepped past him, Cray called out from behind the bars. "Bo Ramsey, you still limping around with half an arm?" Bo did not turn. "You remember Luis Ortega?" Cray hissed. "I do. I'll never forget that brown-eyed bastard. Thought he could out-talk a bullet." Lazy Bo stepped into the doorway. His voice was calm, still, but beneath it was steel drawn silent. "You killed my friend," he said. "And you nearly killed the woman I love." Cray opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Bo's eyes never left his. "You can choke on that rope," he said. "But know this, when it tightens, it will not be justice's hand you feel. It'll be every soul you silenced." Then he walked away. That night the gallows creaked as the wind howled. Eldon Cray did not curse, did not beg. He only stared ahead, as if trying to find some corner of the sky that still belonged to him. But the sky, like the earth, had already moved on. The sign outside read, "The Last Light." It creaked in the wind, hanging above the porch of a humble inn on the edge of a trade road that cut through the Texas panhandle like a scar healed over. Travelers passed it often, cowboys, drifters, broken soldiers, women with dust in their eyes and fire in their hearts. And they all knew the story, or at least the parts they needed. Bo Ramsey and Mira Ortega had built it from ash and memory. Where once a fire had burned down everything, a home now stood. Lucia slipped in the foundation with one hand, learned to hammer sideways and tie knots with his teeth. Mira painted the walls with Lucia asleep on her hip. They lived slow, honest, the way people do when every sunrise is a second chance. Each morning, Bo carried Lucia out to the garden, slung over his back. She would giggle as he pointed to the bean sprouts and whispered names for each plant, calling the potatoes dirt nuggets and the corn yellow ghosts. She clung to his neck like a baby possum, and he never once complained of the weight. "Strongest man in Texas," she would say. "All with one hand," he'd reply. Inside, Mira rolled dough with rhythm and purpose, cornbread and biscuits. Chilly, when she could afford meat, travelers came hungry, left full, and most returned not just for the food, but for the feeling. Because Mira did something more than cook, she told stories. Not fairy tales, but truths wrapped in memory. She spoke of a man named Lewis, with eyes like midnight and hands that healed. She told of how he helped people across rivers, built fires from nothing, and died because he believed people could be better. She never cried when she said his name, but she always smiled. Lucius listened, wide-eyed. She would sit by the hearth, stitching fabric scraps into tiny squares. Over time, her hands grew steady. Her fingers learned the shape of patience. When she turned 10, she embroidered her first scarf, threaded agave blossoms in yellow and red, just like the one her father once wore. Bo held it in his hand for a long time before saying a word. "She has your heart," he said to Mira. "No," Mira replied. "She has his courage." The inn became known along the road as a place to rest your bones, to eat, and sometimes to weep. Soldiers who had seen too much would find the back porch and sit in silence while Lucia hummed old Spanish ballads her mother taught her. People came and went, but the love stayed. One summer evening, as dusk spilled over the hills like molasses, Mira stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Bo was sitting on the steps, watching Lucia chase a butterfly through the tall grass. He turned toward her, eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat. "I used to think I lost everything when I lost my right arm," he said, "but I was wrong." She tilted her head. "I lost a limb," he continued, voice quiet, "but I found a whole family." Mira stepped beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "I once knelt at your gate," she said, voice barely louder than breath, "begging for a plate of food." Bo looked up at her. She smiled. "I never expected to be given a life." He reached for her hand, the left one always, and held it like something sacred. In the distance, Lucia laughed, her scarf fluttering behind her like a banner in the wind. And for a moment, in that quiet between memory and the next breath, the world was still. And ho! Thank you for riding with us through this unforgettable journey of loss, loyalty, and love that rose from the ashes of war and sorrow. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you felt the cold wind of the Texas plains or heard the silent promise in Bo Ramsey's one remaining hand, then you belong here. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more powerful tales like this, where bullets missed but hearts did not, where love defied time, borders, and bloodline. We release new stories that echo through history and heal through the heart. Hit the bell so you never miss a story from the soul of the American frontier. Because out here in the wild,